Hi, in this video, we are going to discuss about Eureka. In our previous video, we have looked into BookMyHotel Monolithic application. The web application consists of GSPs, controllers, services, and the DAOs. So the services like search hotel service, registration service, and booking service are there. We have also seen the walkthrough of this web application. Now we are going to break this monolithic application into microservices. So these are my 4 microservices: registration, booking, search, and hotel, and they are going to run in separate processes. Book My Hotel web application will run in a separate process and it is going to interact with all these microservices. Now, let's say Book My Hotel web application wants to interact with search microservice. One way is that I hard code the URL of the search microservice in Book My Hotel web application. But I'm going to have multiple instances of search microservice. So hard coding the URL is not an option. So the search microservice will register itself to the Eureka server, which has the service registry. This service registry consists of instance details. So all the microservices which are registered to the Eureka are there in the service registry. Book My Hotel web application will connect to the Eureka server, get the instance details from the service registry, and then connect to the service. Now, how does this happen actually? Eureka has REST endpoints. So when search microservice starts, it connects to the REST endpoints of the Eureka server and register itself. Now, in the same way, Book My Hotel web application will also connect to the REST endpoints of Eureka server and get the instance details from the registry and then connect to that microservice. Okay. Now let's look into it with more details. I'm going to create a Eureka server using my Spring Boot application. For this, I'm going to add Eureka server dependencies in my Spring Boot project. Now I'm going to have multiple microservices and also the client, that is Book My Hotel web application. All of these will be having the Eureka client dependencies. So when Eureka client dependencies are added, many beans are exposed and one of the bean will register the microservice to the Eureka server. One of the beans will send the heartbeats to the Eureka server after every few seconds, and it will also start a background thread at the microservice and the Book My Hotel web application side. This thread is going to fetch the registry of the Eureka server and store it at the local cache at the microservice end. So all the microservices and the Book My Hotel web application, which is also Eureka client. So all the Eureka clients will be having the background thread running at their end, which is going to fetch the registry and store it in the local cache. So when the Book My Hotel web application wants to interact with a microservice or one microservice wants to interact with another microservice, in that case, it will look for the registry in the local cache, get the instance from the local cache, and then connect to another microservice. This registry which is there in the local cache will get updated after every few seconds. It is synced with the Eureka server and it will get updated after every few seconds. Now let's look into the Spring Boot project. So I've created a project with this name 02-Eureka and I have this pom.xml file in this. So in this pom.xml file, I have added this dependency, Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka Server. The parent for this dependency is specified over here, and this is Spring Cloud Dependencies module. So Spring Cloud is actually an umbrella project, and this Netflix Eureka is one of the sub projects. So the parent is specified over here, and this dependency is associated with it. Notice the Spring Cloud version. Let's look into it. So the Spring Cloud version is hoxton.sr9. In this form.xml, I have two parents. The first parent I have already shown you related to Spring Cloud, and another is Spring Boot Starter parent. So all other dependencies like Spring Boot Starter Web, Spring Boot Starter Tomcat, and others are associated with this parent, Spring Boot Starter parent. And the cloud dependencies are associated with the cloud parent, that is Spring Cloud dependencies. Okay, now let's look into the main class which I have created with the name of Eureka. Here I have annotated it with Spring Boot application, and I have also annotated it with enable Eureka server annotation. So when I have added the dependency of Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server, and I have also annotated it with enable Eureka server, then Spring Boot kicks in and does all the Eureka server specific configuration and expose the beans and the REST endpoints. Okay, now let's go to application.yaml file. Here I have specified the port, that is 8001. So when I'm going to run this Eureka server, the embedded server will start on the port of 8001. Now let's look into other configuration also. I have specified eureka.instance.hostname as localhost. Generally, if it is not specified, it picks up the host name from the underlying operating system. But sometimes there are multiple host names for your system. So it is advisable to specify the host name in your application YAML file. Here I have specified it as localhost. And if you don't specify it, so sometimes you will see errors. Now there is one more configuration which is specified over here. To understand it, we will look into some more concepts. But before that, let's start our application. So I'm going to start the Eureka server. I'm going to click on Run as Spring Boot application. It is going to start my Eureka server. So here my Eureka server is starting. Okay, so Eureka server has started Eureka server, right? Now I'll go to my Internet Explorer and I'm going to access localhost colon 8001 to open Eureka UI. Okay, so here you can see as of now, there are no instances registered with the Eureka. Fine. So now let's look into some more concepts. When we deploy our microservices, if we deploy it on a single server and the single server crashes, then we don't have any microservices available to us. So what to do? Let's say we decide to deploy our microservices in a data center having multiple machines, but there is a possibility that the whole data center crash. So now it is kind of difficult to manage so many microservices on premises. So I need to manage multiple data centers having multiple machines. So it is most of the time cloud option we are looking for. So generally we go for a cloud option like AWS or Azure, or you can create your own in-house cloud using Kubernetes. So if I take any cloud option like Amazon, there is a concept like region. So a region has multiple zones. So let's assume there is a US East region, and in US East region, there are multiple zones, and each zone is actually a data center. So your microservices will be deployed across the zones. So let's say I have the hotel microservice. So multiple instances of that hotel microservices will be deployed across multiple zones. Okay. So now where is going to be my Eureka server in this scenario? So let's assume my Eureka server is in zone 2. So all the instances which are there in the zone 1, zone 2 and zone 3, all of them will register to the Eureka in zone 2. So there is going to be network calls over here, which will have network latency, right? So now also these microservices which are deployed in different zones are going to send lot of heartbeats to Eureka server, which will do the network congestion also. So in the production, it is always advisable to have Eureka cluster. So let's assume we have the Eureka cluster. We have Eureka in zone 1, we have Eureka in zone 2, and we have Eureka in zone 3. So the microservices in zone 1 will need to register only with the zone 1 Eureka. It does not need to get itself registered to zone 2 Eureka and zone 3 Eureka. So microservices in zone 2 will get registered to zone 2 Eureka. Microservices in zone 3 will be registered to zone 3 Eureka. And these microservices will be synced across. So whatever microservices are registered in zone 1 will also be available in zone 2. But how does this happen actually? So this Eureka server will act as a client to the zone 2 Eureka server, and it will fetch all the registries of the zone 2 Eureka server and keep it over here. And zone 2 Eureka server will act as a client to zone 1 Eureka server and will fetch all the registries of the zone 1 Eureka server. And in the same way, all of the Eurekas in all the zones will act as a client to each other and fetch the registry and keep it with them. And hence all the microservices are available in all the Eureka servers. Now let's go back to our application YAML file and try to understand the settings which I have done over there. So before that, let me show you one more thing. In the pom.xml, I have specified this Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server. If I go to the dependency hierarchy, I can see that when I include Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server, it also includes the Eureka client. As I have just told you that the client Eureka is also acting as a client to another Eureka server in the cluster. So Eureka client libraries are also included. Now, in my case, what is happening? I am starting only a single instance of Eureka server. But by default, whenever Eureka server starts, it also acts as a client and tries to look for another Eureka server and the local host at some specific port. So it starts giving some kind of errors because it is trying to fetch the registry and trying to register with another Eureka server, but there is no other Eureka server present. And I have only a single instance of Eureka server running. So I will give this configuration over here, which tells that don't fetch the registry. Fetch registry as false and don't register with another Eureka server. So it is also specified as false. So it is eureka.client.fetch registry. Notice that this is client setting. So when Eureka is acting as a client, I have to tell it that Eureka, please don't fetch the registry and don't try to register with another Eureka server. So I have specified these settings. If we don't specify these settings, we get some errors when we start our Eureka server. Okay. So in this video, we have understood how to use the Eureka server, how to start the Eureka server. And in the upcoming videos, we will create our microservices and register it with Eureka. And we are also going to see the load balancing with Ribbon. Okay. So see you in the next video. Thank you.